Well, howdy, guys and gals. This is your buddy Backwaters Brenton. Obviously, we are crossing Lake George on the St. Johns River in Florida today. And I thought this might be good weather and a good stretch of time. I'm just doing about 5 miles an hour. It's going to take me like maybe 3 hours to kind of cross the lake here. And I thought it might be a good time to talk about the Alaska, the three failed attempts at going to Alaska. I mean, no, I've been to Alaska. I made it all 3 times, but I've done part 1. I'll link it in the description. And I thought I would do story number 2. I'm kind of doing them in chronological order. The first one was, just quick recap. I went up and worked on a crab processor on I thought it was St. George Island, which would be appropriate since I'm crossing Lake George, but actually it was St. Paul. I looked on a map a little while ago and realized that Triton Industries, their onshore plant was on St. Paul. So correction, but probably no one really cares. But okay. So my second time that I've been to Alaska, and how my theme here is kind of like God and the universe does not really want me to go to Alaska or live there. Any sort of adventurous-minded person, has entertained the notion of the last frontier, especially, Americans, of course, is like, oh, Alaska's the place to go if you're this rugged individualist, which I, somewhat consider myself as, but I'll tell you, Alaska's not for everybody, and I've chalked it up for myself as a place that's great to visit. It's undeniable. The beauty and just it's amazing. It's a one of a kind, right? And I probably will go back and try and break the cycle, break the spell. But I'm going to go back. It's going to be different when I go again. But the second time that I went there and it kind of sucked, let's just put it that way, was this. So this was about, I want to say about the year 2000, 2001 or so, which would have put me at about almost 30. I was probably like 29 or 28, 29, something like that. I can't remember exactly. Into my 20s. And during that time of my life, I was still mostly living out in California. I would kind of come and go, like I lived, I went to college. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to get too sidetracked here so it doesn't become this rambling, epic, thing like I did last time. But, I typically, would return to California as my home state, quite a bit. I lived there for a while. I'd duke it out with the crappy, jobs and the expensive living. And, at least the weather was good. But I was probably living in a van or renting a room from a buddy. I think at this time that I'm talking about, I was renting a room from a buddy named Doug, which I hope is doing good. I haven't seen him in a long, long time, and he was a great friend, and but the other side story. But during that time of my life, I was really into like physical fitness, but like everything, I kind of did it in my own way. I would my fitness regimen was to do pull-ups, push-ups, and curls. And what I would do is this is crazy when I think back on it. In some ways, I kind of screwed up my back doing this, but I used to do about 300 push-ups a day, and I probably wasn't doing them right. I've always had kind of back and neck problems from a car accident that I was in my early 20s, but that, again, is another story. But I used to do about 300 push-ups a day. I would do about 300, let's see, I'd do pull-ups. What I would do is I'd usually go to like a park or like a kid's playground or something where they have like, monkey bars and stuff like that. or sometimes like a tree branch. I mean, it didn't take, all I did is just look for something I could kind of just grab onto and start doing pull-ups until I was exhausted, right? It probably wasn't 300. I know I did, roughly 300 push-ups a day. I do them like cycles of 50 and 60 sometimes. Sometimes I just do a full 100 in a row just to see if I could do it. And I could. And then I would just, find a tree branch or something, and I just do a bunch of pull-ups. I probably did at least 100 a day. And I do and later I got into sit-ups. I do like, a couple hundred sit-ups a day, just kind of go plop down somewhere. I mean, I people must have thought I was nuts. I mean, sometimes I would just go like over to a patch of grass and go, oh, I gotta do my push-ups. And I just go like, in the middle of a conversation, like a break in a conversation, like, oh, hold on a second. I just go like find some place and just go do a bunch of push-ups, And it's like, because it was like I wanted to stay on top of them every day and not let the day get by and, without doing them. And so I just seized an opportunity. So I used to work, I work at restaurants, and I remember I worked at this pizza place. I mean, I did it almost everywhere I worked. And I would just, on a break or something, I'd just go in the bathroom, and I would just, I'd lock the door, and I would just go do all my push-ups. And then I'd wash my hands really good because, sticking your hands on a bathroom floor, but and I'd go back to work. And I also used to be into bicycling a lot. I got to a point where I did bicycle touring. So when I was in California, I used to, ride my bike, 20 miles was nothing. I used to ride. It took a while to build up to this, but I got to a point where 20 miles was just nothing. And I had a really good bicycle. I still have it to this day, and it probably still is a good bicycle, and I should kind of bring it back, I have a couple of bicycles, and I have thought about getting back on the bikes, especially with the price of fuel and such now, and I might do that, because it is, it's such a multi-purpose thing to do. It's transportation, it's exercise, it's one of the many things I liked about bicycling, and especially bicycle touring, was I just called it oxygenating my brain. So I could get to a point where I was just I got to this equilibrium where I was not really getting any more tired. My, blood was flowing, my brain was oxygenated, all my muscles were oxygenated. I mean, not me, just anybody that would be doing this, right? And it would release this level of creativity and a level of euphoria. It was like, I got great ideas, and I got this idea partially from Neil Peart, the drummer for Rush that I really idolize, with amazing lyrics, and he was an absolute genius. And he was into bicycle touring, back in the 80s. He wrote his first book was called The Masked Rider, about bicycling in Africa. Later he got into motorcycles, which I did too. I was always into motorcycles, but I kind of took a little detour for a while into bicycles. And, I remember reading in one of his books that he got a lot of his ideas while he was riding his bikes, because, he probably was a lot like me, where he's just kind of like on the edge of brooding, overthinking, overanalytical, which can really easily go into depression and negativity and stuff. But if you kind of like stay on top of it and you ride the cusp and go over the top of it, it can break through into some really some revelations on understanding and things. That's what I think. That's how I understand it. And it worked for me. I get great ideas. I used to carry a little tape recorder, and I would stop. Sometimes I'd even be riding and I'd have it on my bars, and I would just click the record and I would talk into it. And I think I still have some of those tapes around somewhere where I'm just like panting, going, and then I'm just trying to make this point while I'm riding my bike and panting, and and I was into philosophy and, big thinking, grand thinking, and like what's the nature of reality and existentialism, and, I was in college, and of course that just facilitates that, like with the, with the kind of being a what would you call it, like an idealistic setting of having the luxury of entertaining the big picture instead of just surviving, right? Even though I was just surviving, but, that's a whole different, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, And so I, for a while there, I was really into bicycling, and I loved it. I used to read people's blogs. I read books about it. People, there's one called about this couple who bicycled around the world. I still have the book somewhere. It was tragic because here I am getting off on these tangents again, right? But like, okay, so I had a buddy during that time. His name was Bob. Robert, Bob. I think he's mostly we always call him Bob. And he was also into bicycling. You know, he wasn't quite as hardcore as I was, like all the long distance stuff. But you know, he was in shape. He was a little older than me, about 5 years older than me, and he was moving up to Alaska, to Juneau, Alaska, which, for those that don't know, is in the southeast kind of panhandle of Alaska along the British Columbia coastline. And that part of Alaska is different than the rest of Alaska. It has a completely different climate. It's very much like we're looking at in this video right now. It's, you know, often very cloudy. There can be, you know, months where it rains 25 out of 30 days. I mean, it's a very, like, Pacific Northwest type of, what would you call it, like a temperate rainforest. Very rainy, very dense. And, you know, but he was moving to Juneau to go to college. He got accepted to college up there. And he was going to bicycle. You know, like, part of that is a ferry trip. He was going to bicycle, you know, well, he did, right? And, well, I'll get to that. So he decided, you know, he's going to bicycle up the, you know, start in Northern California and then go up the Oregon coast and then into the Washington coast and then get to Bellingham and jump on a ferry and ride the ferry the rest of the way up to, you know, southeast Alaska. And I have never been good at, like, saying no to an opportunity for, you know, like an adventure like that. And at that time it just sounded amazing. I always wanted to, you know, do something like that. And so I can't remember if he invited me to do it with him, or I invited myself, or it just became, you know, this kind of, like, it was just, you know, both of us, you know, saying, hey, let's just bicycle, you know, to Alaska. And so, you know, the plan was to leave, excuse me, I can't remember what time of year. It was summer, but it must have been towards the end of summer. I want to say it was maybe August or something, right? And I even got, this was how it was back then, and this is how I was back then. I actually just went online and, like, you know, sent off a few letters or something, and I actually got accepted to University of Alaska Southeast, Juneau. You know, back then it was just the world was so much different. And, you know, student loan, you could pretty much just, you know, apply for a student loan. Almost anyone was guaranteed to get one. I certainly, you know, always got them. And unless it was like a really top tier school, you know, most state schools and, you know, small colleges and stuff, they would accept you for the most part if you had any sort of academic, you know, record, which I did. I have been, you know, I think I have attended about 6 or 8 colleges back in the day, back when that was the thing I did with my life, wasting my time, you know, but whole different story. And I was, you know, in between colleges at that time. I actually I'll get to that. So you know, we were going to leave in like a month, and I was like, well, maybe I'll go to a University of Alaska. That sounds great. It gives me, like, you know, something to aim for. And so I, you know, sent off some stuff and last minute thing, and they're like, yeah, we'll accept you. I got an admittance letter and everything. My grades are always pretty good. I graduated from college with like a 3.5 or something. I don't know, which, you know, just seems so stupid these days to, you know, mark a person, you know, mark a person's progress or success in life based on, you know, things like that. But, you know, back then that was a big deal, you know, to me. So we got our bikes, you know, together, and I had kind of a quasi girlfriend at that time. Her name was Samantha, and I bought her a little Toyota van. I try not to get too sidetracked here, but, you know, I got her this one of those boxy 80s Toyota vans. I wish I had it, you know, now. It was like a 5-speed. It was in good shape. It was a California rig. It was all rust-free and stuff. And I got it for like $500. I had to fix, you know, something on it, but I had driven those vans a lot in my 20s, and so I knew them very well. And I got it cheap, and I just, you know, gave it to her because she needed a vehicle and something practical. She was kind of a hippie girl. She was great. She was awesome. And, you know, but one of the kind of deals was, you know, hey, babe, you know, you need to, drive Bob and I up to, like, Crescent City, California, which is right up on the north coast, almost into Oregon. And our bicycle and stuff because we're going to ride to Alaska, and it's like, and I kind of remember why that wasn't a problem. I mean, you would think like if we were like boyfriend and girlfriend, she'd be like, "You're moving to Alaska," or like, "You're going to college in Alaska," like what, But I don't know. Maybe like I don't even remember. Like maybe we're gonna have a long distance thing, or who knows? I don't know. But so she did. She's like, "Yeah, of course, no problem." So the day came and we had all our camping gear on the bikes and saddlebags. I just ran like I kind of did a minimalist setup. I had a small tent and sleeping bag and a mat and some panniers with some food and things like that. And Bob more or less did the same thing. And we got driven up to Crescent City on Highway 101 there, and I think we stayed the night, camped out on the beach or something near there. And next day kind of loaded our bikes up and said our goodbyes and hit the trail, hit Highway 101 north to in the general direction of Alaska. And I remember the first couple days that we were on that trip, because the Oregon coast is beautiful, but it's it's up and down, up and down, up and down. I mean, it's just like one hill after another in a lot of spots, and it's slow going. We tried to do like 20-30 miles a day, which was very doable. You get into a routine and you can do that. But I was pushing it past my then kind of like capabilities, and my lower back was hurting, and I kind of had like sciatica in my legs. And I remember first couple camping nights, I was like walking around stiff backed and just wanting to go straight to bed, and crawled in my tent, and I was in pain, but I didn't make a big deal of it. But I started to like offload a bunch of gear off of my bike. I remember I had like a little pan that I was cooking with, and I just decided I tried to reduce the weight I was carrying my bike as much as I could. I left a bunch of stuff at a campground. And on that trip, on the whole west coast, it used to be, I don't know if it is now, it probably is, but especially on the Oregon coast, the state parks have something called hiker-biker camps. And what they are is like, a normal state park where if you drive in with a camper or something like that, it might cost, back then it was very, fairly reasonable, right? But if you hike or bike in, it's cheap. It's like $3 a night, $4 a night. And there's like hot showers. I mean, it was such a good deal. You just had to kind of prove that you came in on a bike or hike. Usually they saw you come in and, it's hard to fake that. Your bike's all loaded down with like, fishing gear and stuff. I'm sorry, fishing gear, camping gear. And so, we ended up staying at those. But this is always a common theme to almost every, story I might have, especially from back in that time, is that I was just so poor. I had almost no money. I might have saved up $500 for that whole trip. And in, the year 2000, 2001 or something, that is, that was more money. Inflation has definitely gone up in the past 20 years. But that still wasn't a lot of money. It was, it was not enough. And I was just eating as cheap as I could. And you got to eat a lot when you're bicycle touring. You're just burning massive calories. You can eat like a half a gallon of ice cream, when you get to camp. I think we did this once or twice. And go to bed and you wake up in the morning and you're starving, So food becomes your fuel in that type of adventure. And so we're slowly making our way up, the Oregon coast, and Bob and my friendship was kind of getting strained at times. Part of it was, I think, just the stress of that kind of trip, the physical exertion all day long and stuff. Bob also had his, he was a brooding, kind of overly serious, kind of moody guy during that time in his life. And, I certainly was too. And so, we would get in arguments, and sometimes, I'm not saying like all the time, every day, 24/7, but, we'd get these little tips or something about maybe the pace or something. And my theory was always like, the slowest person sets the pace. I bicycled the Oregon coast a second time with a friend of mine. Actually, that same friend I rented from, Doug. He was actually a heart attack survivor. He's also older than me. But he got into bicycle touring to kind of, correct his health, and we ended up, as like a crown achievement. We bicycled the Oregon coast south, so north to south. I can't remember, that was maybe a year or two later, because I always didn't stay up in Alaska, but I'll get to that. And so, we get these tips. I'm sorry. The reason why I mentioned that is because, Doug, in that case, Doug was older than me, and he was also, heart attack survivor and such. He was the slowest guy of the two of us, and I'd always let him set the pace. I didn't really care. I would just go slow. Even if I could blaze on, I would just kind of hang back, and because I was doing it I don't want to just go run off by myself and catch up with him later, or have him catch up with me later. It was always kind of a social thing for me. So it was very natural to me to do that. But with Bob, sometimes he wanted to just race off ahead, and then I'll meet you at the next hiker biker camp, or I would want to get going, and he wants to just take pictures of the seagulls or something like that. I mean, like, we had this very kind of like contrary friendship at times, where it's almost like a power struggle. I can see it now, of course, in my upper middle age here. Is like, it was just a lot of stupid petty stuff of kind of like, oh, I'm in charge, or I'm the whatever. And instead of just surrendering to it and saying, all right, whatever, you need to be the boss. And, I'm capable of that now for the most part. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes it pisses me off. It just kind of depends on the situation. But anyway, we just had this kind of like, and then usually, like, if that we had a day like that, let's say he blazed ahead because he wanted to or whatever, and he would, get there way before me, and then I'd find the camp later. And then whatever, he'd just be excited. Oh, look what I found! It's a great spot. And I just kind of roll with it. Okay, whatever. And it just, so we always kind of recovered from it, but it was annoying, sort of. I remember at least one time on that trip. Later on, we must have gotten some argument. And he just, we almost got to the point where, like, I think I might have said, I'm just going to cut inland and just head home. I'm just going to go back to California. Like, screw this. This is stupid. Or I'll see you in Alaska or something. Whatever, fine. And then, like, but then somehow it didn't happen where he caught up with me again. Bob was a loner, a hardcore loner, but he did want to have company on that trip, and he would rather be doing it with me than doing it by himself, and that's normally how it panned out. And so we made it up to, there was little stories here and there. We stopped, we'd stay at these hiker biker camps, and sometimes we would hang out with other hikers and bikers, and we'd even ride with them for a day or two. And I remember sometimes there were some like cute girls, man, like in really good shape too, as you can imagine. I remember we ran into this couple who from Denmark, and they are the Netherlands or something like that. It's so silly, but the reason why I remember that is because I remember, making an ongoing joke. I'd go over to Bob and be like, dude, I'd like to, explore her Netherlands, and stuff like that. Like, she was a total babe, this blonde, and just, they were, so fit, because you can't be a bicycle tourist and, not be fit. It just comes with the territory. So, we finally made it up to Bellingham, and got some tickets on the ferry. And at that time, the ferries can be very kind of competitive now. You have to book way in advance, and I don't even know with all the the sea garbage, CV stuff. You know what I'm talking about, the cough stuff. That might even be more so. But back then, if you show up on foot or you show up on a bicycle, it was like you could get a ticket for the next one up. And it was, I remember it was $300. I remember one way it was $300, and how they worked it out was, you could pretty much get on the ferry system, and you could go as far in one direction as they go. So, like, it is all the same price. You could be going to Haines, which I think is the farthest you can go, and it gets on a road to the mainland. Or you get to Ketchikan, which is like closer to Seattle than Juneau, and on and on and on. So we got the cheapest tickets we could, and one of the reasons, I'll never forget this, one of the reasons why it was cheap was you were relegated to camp on the back deck outside on the ferry. You could go inside, you could hang out in a booth, or like there was always these tables, and there was like a cafeteria, you can buy food and stuff. It was a full-blown ferry, multi-day ferry. And if you want to spend the money, you could actually get a cabin, But, when it comes to sleeping, the cheap ticket was on the back deck outside, and it was behind the smokestack. Okay, so imagine like a big tug type ship that has these big stacks, right? Like a Titanic type ship or something. And it's just belching out, diesel exhaust, and it has to go somewhere back behind the boat, and it just wafts past that area of the boat. So it took me about a day or so to realize, like, oh my God, I'm just getting headaches and I'm not sleeping very good. And it leaves this weird taste in your mouth, because when you're smelling diesel exhaust long term, it starts to get into your taste buds and things like that. And it's like a sweet taste almost. It's really strange. And I was like, oh, and I finally realized, it just occurred to me, it was like right in our face. We're like, dude, like we're smelling diesel exhaust all the way to Alaska. And it didn't really bother Bob that much. He's like, whatever, man, whatever. I'm like, man, I've always been sensitive to that. I'm like, I don't want to smell this diesel exhaust. So I would just go sleep in a booth. I just kind of crawl up, and go in there at night and find an open booth and just lay down and make my own little pillow and pull my stocking cap over my eyes and get a little bit of sleep. But it was by no means, pleasurable. But it was only like a 3-day trip. And it was very pretty. I mean, we spent most of the day just kind of moving around the front and the back of the boat, looking at the scenery going by. Going up the southeast passage, the what do you call it? Southeast passage? Yeah. Up through Canada. And so, but, Bob was starting to act kind of weirder than usual, being more moody than usual, avoiding, and like avoiding me and avoiding people and whatever. And so, when we finally got to Alaska, we got to Juneau, unloaded our bikes, and we're like, let's go find a place to camp, and, like set up our camp, because we're, going to live in the dorms, I think is how it was going to work. But they weren't open yet, until school started, so I had a few weeks left, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. And so we found this camp spot. It was actually a really sweet camp spot, not too far from the ferry landing, and it was kind of up on a hill, and, but covered in trees and stuff, so it was like very, like hard to discover, and yet close to town. And we camped there, and then the next day Bob's like, I'm gonna go to the campus and go straighten stuff out for school. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to town and go check that out, we'll meet back here later. Okay, sounds good. So I went off to town, rode around, walked around, checked the place out. It was back before cell phones and all that, right? And so came back to camp, towards the end of the day in the evening, and Bob never came back. I'm like, oh boy, okay. So but Juneau is a pretty small, small area. You're not going to get out of Juneau unless you have a boat or something, or it's like 22 miles of roads up there or something. You're going to cross paths with everybody that's up there. And in the summer, there's a lot of tourism. These big like princess cruises come up there. That's how most people explore that part of the world, right? And sometimes you're downtown, one of those pull up, or they're in town, and it's just the town is like swelled in population by like 4 times, right? So many tourists, right? Well, I mean, I was a tourist too, basically, but I just got there in a different way. And so I didn't see Bob for a couple days. And I'm like, what the world? And then finally, I'm sitting down there in town, and I didn't have much money. I was kind of thinking like, oh, this sucks, Now, today, I just would have wrote it up, if I had the attitude like I do now. I'm just kind of like, well, it's his loss, whatever, But Bob was somewhat of a game player and, whatever, immature, like I was. And one day, a day or two later, I'm sitting down there on the grass in town, and reading a book or something. I used to read a lot, and he comes up behind me. He's like, "Dude, what's up? I haven't been looking for you, blah blah." And he's with somebody that he must have met only a day or two, right when we got there. And I should mention this too. Bob he's never going to listen to this. I mean, I would be surprised if he did, and if he did, he would know it's true. Bob was a big pot smoker. I mean, he's was and might still be. I don't know. He's a total pothead. Like, just loved smoking pot. He could be stoned all day and all night. Sometimes he would dabble in other drugs too, but he was never a druggie. He wasn't like, he was just mostly a pothead. And I never have been. I have nothing against pot at all. I actually wish that I could smoke pot, but unfortunately, my brain chemistry is such that if I smoke marijuana, I get really paranoid. because I'm so introverted that it really just kind of takes me down a downward spiral of like, just not, it's not a fun experience. I've actually read an article once that made a lot of sense to this, where basically that's what marijuana does. There's a certain type of brain chemistry that makes people very euphoric, and that's why they like it, and that's great. I mean, it's basically like nature's medicine in a way, but to some people, right? And there's other people that have a different type of brain chemistry that basically does the opposite, where it makes them, it makes them paranoid. And I'm one of those people. And so I wish it's always been so readily available in my life. I mean, grew up in a Northern California town that's basically like, the cash crop has been marijuana since time immemorial, since the hippies got there. It's never been hard for me to get. I could have been a pothead, and from the get-go, but it never worked for me. But at the same time, I never really had a problem with it. And so, if that makes sense, like if it works for them, in some ways I envy people like that, because I can see how sometimes it's a stress reliever, and sometimes it's, it's so natural, and it's better than taking psychotropics and fentanyl and SSRIs and stuff. I mean, I can see where a person's lucky to have pot work for them, So anyway, Bob was a big pothead, and I think if I remember correctly, what happened was he got, to town, and the first thing he wanted to do was find someone to get pot from, and so he, went and found somebody to get, buy pot from, or also smoke pot, and, take me to your dealer type thing. And, he would, and most of the time, people like that make like-minded friends, and so he ended up, hanging out, instantly kind of hooking up with this guy, that also was a pothead, and they're like, oh, dude, what's up, and I was like, oh, well, but what happened was Bob just moved on. He's just like, all right, well, we got to Alaska, and I found my pot friend. You're not as much fun as, it's like, what is the country song? You ain't much fun since I quit drinking. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just, I was not as fun as, some new friends he's making up there. And I do remember at that time it really bothered me. I was like, I took it really personally. I was pissed. He's going to ditch me, and, he kind of did. He kind of ditched me. And so I made it up to the campus. I checked it out. I was like, and I figured out really quickly, like, I don't want to live in Juneau, Alaska. It was so isolated. I mean, it is. It's an isolated place. You can't drive out of there. You have to fly or boat out of there. And that has always kind of been one reason why I have never felt really comfortable in Alaska, because I found this out for sure the third time I went up there, which I will get to that story next, the next time. But I feel trapped up there because, Canada's in the way. And, America. And Canada is absolutely beautiful, and I love Canada, and I used to go up there all the time, and I used to, visit. I'd go up there 2-3 times a year. I've been all over Canada myself. But it's just gotten progressively worse, and it's only gotten worse, with just like the border crossings and everyone's a criminal, and now with the whole CV cough stuff, I mean, it's just forget it. I've just completely thrown in the towel on going to Canada anymore, which is a bummer, because I especially love the Maritimes. I would love to go back to Newfoundland, go back to Prince Edward Island, and, but anyways. So I figured out really quickly, like, I do not want to live in Southeast Alaska. But I had a problem. I didn't have enough money for a ferry ticket home. It was $300 to get back home, and I was that poor. And I had no one I could call, to like, can you loan me $300 or whatever. I'll get to that. But like, so what I did is I was on campus, and I looked on a bulletin board for work, and I might have asked some people, some questions and stuff, and they're like, oh yeah. And so I found there's a professor that was just starting at that campus. He was from the East Coast somewhere in New York, I want to say. And he just got there, and he was, settling in. He bought a house, and, but he was kind of still a young guy. He's probably in his 40s or something. But I'll never forget this. He was, man, like everything's picking up here. I sure hope. I mean, this boat can take it, but this is getting a little rougher out here than I was expecting. So he was incredibly short. He was like 5'1" or 2, and that doesn't fare very well for most guys. Not just in, just in a lot of things. It just makes life hard when you're that short, a lot, most of the time. And he had the most grating personality. I remember this, he could not listen. He had zero capacity and zero ability to listen. He'd talk right over the top of you. He was a weirdo. I mean, the guy, I couldn't really stand to be around him, but anyways, he was looking for someone to help him move all of his household belongings into his new house. He was going to pay them, right? He put up a message on the bulletin board. And I showed up and, I was like, I'll do it. I just need the money. I want to get home. So I started working for him. He even had me digging a ditch behind his house, like a culvert, to divert any sort of water that might come in the direction of his, the back of the house, right? It was like water drainage. And I was just back there working my ass off. I would just, I'd show up there on my bicycle and I'd work all day and I'd dig and I'd be, loading furniture out of, containers. And, I put in some time, I put in some work, and I did tell him, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get home. I'm trying to basically raise $300, go buy a ticket and, get back home. Like, this is not for me. And sometimes I would hang out with him after work. He would might have some food around or a beer or something like that. And he'd be telling me about his, stories of back home in New Jersey, I think maybe he's from. He was definitely an East Coaster. And he was just a weirdo. Like, I kind of feel sorry. If I met him today, I'd feel sorry for him because he was such an outcast. He probably had been discriminated against, so much in his life. By women. I mean, women, let's just face it, guys, if you're under 6 foot tall, you're not going to get the attention of a lot of women, especially when you're younger. And I could tell he really wanted a woman. And I remember thinking, like, man, coming to Alaska for women, that's dumb. That's like going to, it's like, there's a saying up there. I don't, it's a dumb saying, but there's a woman behind every tree. Like, there's lots of trees in Alaska, so that really doesn't fit. But you get my point. Alaska is not the place to go to find a woman because it's such a frontier state. Unless you're in Anchorage, which is the city, it's 20-1. I mean, it's just, you get out into some of these smaller towns. I mean, Juneau, I can't remember what that was, but I'm sure there's a way more men than there was women. It's just Alaska. That's what it's known for. And so, but he was a professor, so who knows, God, at the end of the day, God will bless you. So, but he was such a pain in the ass. I worked, and so what I did is I worked for like a week, and I said, dude, like, I've racked up, 40 hours, can you pay me? And he's like, he'd come back there and be like, oh, this ditch isn't thick and deep enough, and this, you got to do this to this, and you scratched my dresser, and and he was trying to find ways to not pay me, or pay me less or something like that. And so he was not going to pay me. I remember it came down to, I was like, well, dude, you gotta, then pay me what you think, you should pay me. And he was like, I'll give you $60 or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God, I was so pissed. So what I did, I'm not proud of this, but take it as it happened. So I came back the next day. I mean, he still thought I was going to keep working or try to, fix that ditch, to his liking, so he'd pay me or something. I came back when he was at work. He was on campus, and I filled the ditch back in. I took all the mound, I just filled the ditch all the way back in. I undid all of my work, even though, it's, how dumb is that, right? To dig a ditch to fill it back in, right? I think that was like Cool Hand Luke or something, right? And remember that movie? But so, yeah, I was that spiteful, and I was kind of like, I've never been good with people kind of taking advantage of me or really anybody, it's like it just rubs me the wrong way. And so he knew I was desperate. I mean, I was living in my tent. Here's a little side story I'll tell you too. I ended up just living in that camp spot that Bob and I found when we first got there. And I was living in my tent. I'd leave it up during the day because it was that kind of like hidden. And I'd ride my bicycle over to that guy's house and I'd work, or I'd go to town. I was actually eating at a homeless place in town. I remember this name's going to be funny to you guys probably. It was called the Glory Hole, which, I mean, I guess they've just never heard of, like, what the connotation of that that is, right? I mean, but they called it was Christian, you know, that's where the glory comes from, but you know, it's like the glory hole, right? So like, you know, whatever. I wouldn't have called it that, but they would serve like 3 meals a day. They were so, you know, that most towns, you know, back then, especially like, and you're in Alaska, you know, they were used to people showing up off the ferry or off the boat, or who knows how they got there, flat ass broke and starving. And so they would feed. You walk in there, they'd have snacks for you. They'd have breakfast if you show up there at the right time. You could take showers there if you show up there at the right time. You could do your laundry. I think you could actually even stay there. They had like lots of rules, like you couldn't drink. And I mean, not that I had that problem. I didn't have enough money to drink. But, you know, I could have easily have abided by that, even if that was the case. And so, but I never stayed there. That's never been my style. I don't want to sleep with a bunch of snoring, smelly, you know, guys in a dorm room. So I would just go stay in my tent, but I would come there and I would eat. And they kept me going. They kept me fed. And my sole goal at that time was just to get back to California. I was going to have a whole new appreciation of like kind of back home. And I did when I got home, but I got in the head a little bit. So I went and I did all my work. I mean, I wish I could have moved all this furniture back out into the storage container, you know, but I couldn't, obviously. You had the place locked up. And I remember I was riding my bicycle back into town, and I came through, I rode my bicycle, I cut through a parking lot that was a bank parking lot, and I looked on the ground and I saw a Canadian $100 bill. I couldn't believe it. I stopped. Someone must have been going through the drive-through, and they dropped it, and they just didn't realize it. It just got stuck in the gutter, and I picked it up, and I was like, a Canadian $100 bill. Oh my God! And I went right into the bank, and I cashed it in for U.S. dollars. It must have been $80 or something like that, 80 U.S. dollars. And it was like a windfall. And so I put that away, you know, thinking that will be, you know, almost a third of the way of getting back to California, and, you know, on the ferry, I should say. And so it's starting to rain pretty hard here, guys. And so there was this girl that, young woman, I should say, that worked, either worked at the glory hole or like went there a lot, you know, but she wasn't full blown like homeless, you know, destitute or anything. I mean, I can't remember, maybe volunteered there or something, but she, you know, I'd talk to her sometimes when I'd go there, you know, and I remember I came there and I said, you know, want to go, let's go get a couple beers after, you know, like after this. And she went, oh, that sounds good. Let's go get some drinks. And so we made a plan to meet like a couple hours later at this bar, you know, just a couple streets over or something in Juneau. And she shows up and she has a friend with her. And, you know, I was like, well, okay, you know, and so I've got us all like 3 drinks. You know, in Alaska is expensive. It's always been more expensive than the mainland. That's just the nature of it. And I must have spent, you know, $20 of my $80 or something like that getting us some beers. And I remember we were just sitting at the table and they're all kind of looking at me and they're looking at each other, and then they drink them and then they kind of set their glasses down. They looked at me like, all right, you know, we're ready for another. I mean, it was so unmistakable and so obvious. And it wasn't like, I mean, you know, of course, right? Like I'm not naive. I didn't just fall off the turnip truck, you know, like it's not the first time this has ever happened, right? But like, they basically were like, oh, because I remember I told her, I said, oh, I found this Canadian $100 bill, and you know, let's go get some drink. And I really think that she, in her mind, she heard it as, let's go spend this Canadian $100 on drinks at the bar, you know. And I guarantee if I would have blown it all there, they would have tipped their last glass and looked at each other and said, oh, we're late for, you know, fill in the blank, right? Like Sunday school or whatever. So they were just using me, I guess is what I'm trying to get to, which is fine. That's just fine. I might have taken it personally then, but I certainly don't take it personal now. And so, but I caught onto it really quick. I was just like, oh, they're going to let me just spend every bit of my windfall money on overpriced drinks for them. And so I said, okay, well, and on top of bringing a friend, like uninvited, like I'm like now I'm like feeding your friend drinks, like give me a break. And so I said, well, hey, have a nice day, guys. Thanks for showing up. And I remember they kind of looked at it, well, and I just walked out. I mean, I was always good at that. I just picked up my bag or something, my shoulder bag or something, and I just walked out, jumped on my bicycle, and took off. I'm like, I'm not going to let them, you know, drain me dry. But I still had the same problem of like, how am I going to get home? So what I ended up doing, I remember this. I'll try to get to the end here. So I called my friend Doug. I might even called him collect. I think I did. I mean, I think it was like $20 or something. I called him. He picks up. I'm like, Doug, I am so sorry. I mean, this is, he knew it was a little bit out of character, for me. I'm like, I hate it up here. I got to get home. I do not want to stay here. Would you please loan me $300 to buy a ferry ticket, or will you buy it online, or I don't know. Somehow, he would buy it or whatever, and he'd just be waiting for me at the ferry. And I had it all worked out, like the next ferry leaves on Thursday or something like that. And so he's like, yes, I will do that for you. And I said, I will pay you back. As soon as I get home, I'll just get a job washing dishes, whatever. I'll have you paid off in a month. He's like, I believe you. I trust you. He knew. Like, I'm always been reliable in that regard. And he did. He loaned me $300. Now, there's a possibility, I don't know if I'll ever get this confirmed, but there's a possibility he might have just called my dad, who lived 5 miles away in my hometown or whatever. That's always been kind of in the background or whatever, and just said, Brenton's, I would never dream of calling my dad. Now, there were times in my life where I was in Europe, flat broke in the winter, and I somehow got through to America and called my dad, and I'm like, I'm flat ass broke, sleeping, in a snowbank in Croatia. Can I have enough money to get home, whatever? And he's actually said no. And my dad's bailed me out here and there. Don't get me wrong. Like, there's one time I got busted on a driving ticket warrant in Utah, and I got my van impounded, and I got put in jail in this small little town in Utah. And my dad paid the bail and got me out, mostly because he didn't want me to come back to California. He wanted me to continue on to Michigan to go back to college, which is where I was headed. School was starting in like 2 days, and like if I was sitting in jail over this stupid thing, then school would, college would have started, and I would have missed out, and I inevitably would have just ended up back in California, probably causing him problems, right? So, anyways, you get kind of backstory on my life. So Doug said yes, and somehow I got a ticket, and it was waiting for me, and I was going to leave in like 2 days, and I saw Bob 1 or 2 more times, and I basically just said, F you, and like, we had words, and I might even got in his face, once or twice, and been like, dude, you're a dick, like that. You don't ride with you don't invite your buddy to ride with you to Alaska, and then ditch him the first night and disappear, and go find your pot buddies. And I mean, I can be really nasty when I want to be, and sometimes deservingly so, like as in they deserve it, and I think he probably did. He probably deserved to get punched in the face, to tell you the truth, but that didn't quite come to that. And so, anyways, the day I was leaving, I showed up at the ferry terminal, which is kind of the main hub of, downtown Juneau there. So relieved. I got my bike I pulled it in and put it where it's supposed to go, and got my, all my gear, and I just had this whole new appreciation for life, and I, heading back home, felt so good. And I met this young couple. They were like probably 30, roughly the same age as me, that had made a skin boat. I'll never forget this. They were from Portland, Oregon, and they made a traditional skin boat, like maybe Inuits would make or something, like 1,000 years ago. And they paddled it. They like rowed it. They rowed, as in row your boat, all the way from up the Inner Passage to Juneau, and then they loaded it on that ferry to go home. Like I was so envious of that guy to find an adventurous, pretty young woman too. Like, I mean, she was really a sweetheart, sweet and pretty, and both, of course, they're both really fit. And they kind of befriended me. I told them, I can't remember. We had some connection. I'm like, I bicycled up here, and they were really nice to me, And we were talking, and we're up on the top deck, and it was a rare sunny day, and we're just about to like pull the lines and start heading home. And that professor, that little 5'1" professor, showed up because he must have figured out I was leaving. And he walked up there and he got in my face right in front of that couple. He's just like so mad at me that I filled in, that ditch I dug for him, and I'm a loser and I'm a piece of crap, and I knew some of his problems when he framed it like this. He's just like, I'm a winner. I'm a professor. Like, I get the work done. Like, I deserve success. You're a loser. You're living in a tent. You're broke. And, I mean, he wasn't wrong, but he wasn't right either. I mean, it was obvious he had this, like, I got something to prove. You're not going to get one up on me. And I did, because I basically didn't do a bunch of free work for him to have him continue to move the goalpost, so that I continued to do even more work for him, and then he never paid me. Because at the end of the day, I couldn't get him to pay me. I mean, what am I going to do? Beat it out of him or something? So my conclusion was just, all right, I'll just undo all my work. And I did, as much of it as I could. And so he was so, he must have been very mad about that I was able to pull that off. But also, I don't know. Who knows? I can't get into his head. But he was pissed, and he got so insulting. And he even turned to that couple. He's like, I wouldn't hang out with this guy, and you better watch out for him. And this, and he's like trying to saying it loud, so like people are standing around and watching. It was very embarrassing. And I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to be on this ferry, for the next 3 days with this tarnished, reputation from this little pipsqueak. And he finally, and I remember he turned, again, these are lessons, these are big lessons in life that I'll never forget. So he was trying to get them on his side, turn them against me. He could tell, they were just standing there kind of witnessing this whole thing. And I remember just standing there, and I was keeping my cool. I was just like, dude, just calm down. Just go find somebody else to dig the ditch. And, you wouldn't pay me. I was kind of standing up for myself, telling him the truth. And he tried to get this couple on his side. And I remember the girl, they're both very calm, and they're kind of watching it in a very despondent way. And they turned to him and they said, well, something like, well, you seem really angry. Like, oh, you must be very angry. Or it was a very compassionate thing to say. And it was a very diffusing thing to say. Very Zen-like, very compassionate, towards him, towards the situation, diffusing the situation. And so he gave up. As soon as he realized that there wasn't going to be this escalating event that was going to happen, resulting in me getting, him getting his revenge on me, he just stomped off down the plank, back to the crowd, cursing and yelling and, trying to make his point. But he didn't get anywhere because, for one thing, he wasn't very respectable. I mean, and that's probably part of the problem, right? Like, you just look at a little angry young man, I shouldn't say young, just an angry little man like that, and it almost becomes comical, it becomes tragic. He had a life of just not getting a lot of respect. And when someone disrespects him, partially by his own doing and his own actions and reactions, in this case, not paying me for work that I did now, and so, he brought it upon himself. Now, I can see all that in hindsight, but at the time, I had such a guilty conscience, and I've always kind of had this, I'll claim stuff that isn't mine, and so I just went, oh, I'm so sorry about that, guys, after he left, and I'm so, and I tried to explain to them, what happened. They totally understood. There's oh, yeah, we could kind of sense that, we could see that, and, and they were very understanding. They actually took my side. They liked me. They were just like, oh yeah, we could see he was, out of line, this and that. But I took it as oh, this is so embarrassing, and now they're going to be suspicious of me and my character. And so I mostly stayed away from them the whole boat ride home. I just kind of went off on my own, read some books, and checked on my bike and got food where I could. I probably, had enough to get some donuts, bananas or something. I might have had, I got a little food from the glory hole and stuffed it in my bag before I, hit left. And so when we got down to Bellingham, I remember, I crossed their path a couple times in the boat. They'd be like, hey, oh, it's good to see you. And they tried to start conversations and invite me over to their table and play cards and share their food. And, I remember I did go sit with them a couple times, and they told me about their amazing trip in their handmade skin boat, all the way north. I remember asking them, where did you sleep? And they said, oh, we turned it into a tent. We pull it up on the beach, and we had this little post that we put in the middle of the boat, and we put it up. It was like a little A-frame tent, and we could just sleep inside the tent, or inside the boat, we should say. And then in the morning, we just take it down, and we just launch back out in the water. It was amazing. I still am amazed. They should have wrote a book. And so when we got to Bellingham, we were getting off the boat and getting the stuff, and I remember they came up to me and they said, how are you getting home, the rest of the way home? And I said, I don't know. I said, I guess I'm gonna ride my bicycle, or I'm gonna ask someone to come pick me up or something. I can't remember. And so they said, well, we're going to Portland, we'll give you a ride as far as Portland. I mean, they offered it. They liked me. It sounds funny to say it that way, but they really liked me. Despite myself, despite my self-worth, And I'm like, oh, that'd be wonderful. And so I remember they went through all the trouble of loading my bicycle on top of the their car, and I, squeezed it because they had all their stuff too, and we somehow squeezed my stuff and myself, into the station wagon. I think one of their parents, picked them up and kind of told our stories on the way home, and we got back to Portland, and then it's a little hazy. I can't remember exactly how I got home from Portland, from Portland down to Northern California, but I think it might have been a bus, or my girlfriend, Samantha, might have come up. I might have worked it out where, like, I paid for the gas, or, not because she would require that, but because she was also a poor college student, just like me, And so we worked it out where, like, she might have drove the Toyota van up, and picked me up. I might have ridden as far. I can't remember. I rode some of the way, and then she came up, or somebody, I think it was Sam, came up and picked me up and gave me a ride the rest of the way home, back home. So that that's my second trip to Alaska. Okay, as you can see, it was full of learning experiences, to say the least. But it was very stressful. At times, it was probably very worthwhile. I'm not saying it wasn't it wasn't. It had a lot of amazing experiences within that I could point out. But this is getting pretty darn long. We're almost at an hour. But it was overall just a very stressful, intense kind of seat of the pants, no security sort of experience that lasted about, 2 or 3 weeks, probably. Including the ride up, more like a month. It was probably a month. Everything I just described to you, I think we made it from Northern California to Bellingham in about 2 weeks. And I was probably up in Alaska for about 2 weeks, and then it was maybe another week home. So let's call it a month. And I just remember coming home, and I'm like, oh man, I just went and got 2 jobs. I paid off. I was making $5 an hour washing dishes at the Friar Tuck's restaurant in downtown Nevada City. And I paid off my friend Doug in like 2 weeks. I was doing like 10-hour, 12-hour shifts, working 7 days a week. No one wanted to show up to wash dishes. I just show up and do it because I hate owing people money, individuals money. And I paid him off quick. He was so impressed. I remember I gave him I had him paid off in like one or 2 paychecks. It was amazing. He was very impressed. He's very happy. So, yeah, and then, the venture continued. I went back to college, but that's, a story for another time, and that's a story for another time. So, okay, guys, if you're here at the end of this video, you're amazing, and hopefully this was entertaining, and thank you so much for listening, and I will see you again soon over on Backwaters and Backroads, and I will do the last installment of miserable trips to Alaska. There's actually one more. So, okay, guys. I will catch you later.